welcome to the DegenCast. I'm your host, Meow Meow, and today with me are Defi Degen
What's up?
and Ian.
Hey guys.
And before we start, smash that subscribe or follow button depending on where you're listening to us. And today's podcast is brought to you by Xpands, the highest paying fakes API in DeFi. So, lots. It's been kind of strange week, but we have a black gold topic cliffhanging from last week. If someone is opening a beer already, great. No one wants to talk about oil on being sober, huh?
No, we can talk about it.
But not sober.
I mean, it's an interesting topic. I mean, I don't think, with us being in the countries and places that we are, not too sure that any of us are really aware what's really going on there. I mean, the information we're getting is probably, highly filtered and highly curated. But it appears that, we have two basically parallel prime ministers in this country, in Libya, that are it seems like they might get into a little war about who controls the national oil corporation there. And, you have to wonder, given world events recently and politics, you have to wonder, like, which one is US backed? And is the US or NATO behind this? And if so, what direction is this going to go in?
Okay, it's easy to understand who. Like the side who's not getting bombed by NATO forces, right? It's gonna be easy.
Yeah, that's a pretty good indicator.
Yeah.
Middle East politics are so hard to follow sometimes. I went and tried to read up a little bit about this the other day after we talked, and I think, like you had mentioned, there's just not a lot of information out there about it. So it makes me wonder really what exactly is going on.
Well, and the weird thing about Middle East politics, and really politics in anything that we meddle in, is that, sometimes you end up in these weird situations where, okay, one side is trained and armed by the CIA, and sometimes the other side might be trained and armed by, some other US agency or some other country, sometimes an ally of ours. And it's just really strange because obviously that kind of thing is not typically included in the news reports, for example. So it's, we're always fed this presentation of, oh, these are the good guys, those are the bad guys. But for example, in Afghanistan, we know that the CIA basically created Al-Qaeda, created the Taliban. I mean, that's, pretty much historical record at this point. And then, of course, we had to go to war with them. So I'm just always curious about, hey, what's our involvement here? And, what's the end game here?
Well, there is no end game. It's all about control, right? Because I believe that even agency do some work for hire, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, is the end game just a perpetual state of unrest? It sounds to me like that may actually be the case.
Well, I think in this particular example, the end game is obviously oil. And I think this is basically a fight between warring factions in Libya over who gets to sell us that oil. That's what I think.
Yeah, it's so strange to view this from our perspective and point of view, and kind of where we're at in the United States. It's hard to fully understand it.
Yeah, well, especially because our access to information is so filtered. We only read and see what they want us to read and see. So, it's really hard to get like on the ground information. And then even if you find on the ground information, you don't know that it's not propaganda or that it's not being fed to you for a specific reason to make you feel a certain way about it. We just have to kind of take what we have.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Now that, I'll be honest with you, I don't know that I would have been aware of this unless we talked about it last week. Haven't seen much on the news about it, but it'll be interesting to follow now to see what happens.
Yeah, there definitely is like very little on the news about it, which is kind of surprising because you would think they would start building support for, whatever particular stance the US and our allies is going to take in this little fight. So it's kind of weird.
Well, the thing is, if you think about it on a bigger scale, right, the perpetual state of war, right, is actually good for the oil. I mean, no one will care about what the companies are doing there when there is a civil war is going, right? So people are fighting, oil gets pumped, oil gets moved under the radar, no see that's gonna be really, really cheap, all this stuff. It's what happened already several times.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's one thing. Like it's almost, absolutely predictable. Like you could almost bet on it that if the U.S. is experiencing inflation and high gas prices and high oil prices, you can almost guarantee that we'll end up in a war in some place that coincidentally has a lot of oil.
Well, the thing is, again, when you have internal problems, like I believe there is some kind of a political textbook where it says, have internal problems, you should start an external war just to distract people from these problems. Nothing to see, sir.
Oh yeah, yeah, 100%. It's called the shiny object trick.
Oh yeah, exactly. The problem with Libya, again, we have zero idea what's going on there, right? And what we can say is to make some correlations between what really happened, and it's happened a few times, I believe. Operation Desert Storm, yeah, and something like that. And
I gotta ask,
go.
would this be happening if Gaddafi was still alive?
I think still yes, to be honest, right? Because Gaddafi was again a dictator who was supplied by some foreign power and protection.
So I guess the real question is, though, if Gaddafi was still in power, would we just be buying oil from him, or would we be attempting to overthrow him for a more U.S. friendly alternative?
Oh, sir, for a second, you're not buying oil from Gaddafi himself, nor the company. You're buying the oil from a company who is doing the quote unquote contractor work there. Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, of course, but the profits would almost certainly, be heavily weighted towards the government there. And
he
it's like,
certainly wasn't U.S. friendly. I don't think. I think it's fair to say that.
oh, I fully agree, but you don't have to be U.S. friendly for us to do business with you. Like, for example, Biden this week went and kind of got on his knees and bent the knee for Saudi Arabia. After claiming that he was going to make them a pariah state.
Well, he did tell him though, right? And I'm not particularly. I just don't know that he's been particularly effective. But he did say we hold you responsible. I mean, at the same time, I don't know. I think foreign diplomacy is important, and you kind of got to do what you got to do. Remember what Trump called the what was the prime minister of Hong Kong, or I don't even remember what it was, or was it Taiwan? I don't remember who he called. But you remember how big of a deal that was, and how everybody got onto him for that. But you got to do it. You just got to do it.
Right. But when Trump went to Saudi Arabia, the media accused him of rubbing elbows with warlords and murderers. And then when Biden goes and gets on one knee for the same people, it's like the media just runs interference. Like, oh, well, he had to. It's necessary. And but the funny thing, in my opinion, is that he went there presumably to ask them to increase oil output, and they agreed to increase it by like 3 million barrels within 10 years or something like that, which means that his trip, his whole begging venture was a failure.
I just Googled this. So in 2016, Trump called the Taiwan president-elect. Oh, wait. President-elect Trump called the president of Taiwan, which broke a policy set in 1979. And but really, was that a big deal? I don't know. I mean, I don't think
that was because the U.S. has always. I mean, we've wavered on it, but it's called the One China policy, which means that we acknowledge that China believes that Taiwan is theirs, despite the fact that Taiwan does not agree with that.
Yeah, I just think foreign diplomacy is probably important, and I just don't know that it's as cut and dry as everybody makes it out to be.
Right, and no, it never is.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you're missing one important point. Okay. If you take a look at the current situation from a perspective of global position, I want to remind you that majority of grain which sold from Russia and Ukraine goes to the Middle East. So
To go to Libya?
I did, including Libya, by the way. Yes, including. So if you think it from that perspective, I believe Biden's travel to Saudi Arabia was something about, yeah, guys, we'll back you up in case some big Middle East war gonna break out. And believe me, I can be wrong, but I can like bet $10 on it, right? That there's gonna be a big Arabic war pretty damn soon.
Well, but that's always been our Saudi Arabia policy. I mean, our two biggest allies in the Middle East are Saudi Arabia and, of course, Israel. And, Saudi Arabia is what keeps a lot of these Arab nations from just completely attacking Israel. So, I mean, our positions are strategic, even when they're stupid. But it's,
Yeah.
it's still
Yeah.
it's still weird to me. Like, it's just always been weird to me that it's like an obligation for American politicians to be full on Zionist. That's just always been weird to me.
Well,
Let's not go that path. Let's not go that path. What I'm trying to say here, right? Saudi Arabia being a big ally on the Middle East, right? Being the US strong point, is basically the Biden's visit there was just to show to the Middle East who's taking the sides here. So, because if you think of that, I believe a few days ago, Turkey started a so-called counter-terrorist operation in Syria, where they bombed the pro-Russian separatists or rebels, or actually no, I believe they have like government forces in Syria right now, which is basically a prelude for the war. Anyway, Amazon got called out that there is a special form for the police where they can request Ring camera footage without warrant. It's basically a emergency request.
No,
I have a hot take on this one, and I know
Okay, go.
Degen, you and I are going to disagree probably.
I'll bet we'll
Uh,
actually agree. But go ahead.
Okay, I don't see the problem at all here. What's the problem? They don't need a warrant. They only need a warrant to compel them to do it. You can ask anything you want, and so
Okay.
the fact that they don't have a warrant is irrelevant.
So here's my take on it. Now, I have a problem with it just in terms of privacy, right? And in terms of constitutional rights.
Wait, what do your constitutional rights have to do with Amazon, though?
Well, no, they
nothing.
don't. That's the thing. Like it's up to everybody to choose which companies to provide data to, because you need to know if the company that you're providing data to is going to fight for your privacy or not. But that being said, this is nothing new. Facebook does the same thing. Twitter does the same thing. Like, this is nothing new. Like, it's common for big tech companies to provide a certain amount of data to law enforcement when they verify that it's an accurate law enforcement request. They don't always require warrants. Like, warrants like you said, warrants compel them if they refuse. But most of these tech companies will do it without a warrant if they believe the request is justified. That's nothing
Well,
new.
it's probably also disingenuous in that it doesn't, it ignores the fact that Amazon tells you they're going to do it ahead of time. When you agree to their terms and conditions,
Right.
you most certainly agree to give them the ability to do this if they choose to do it.
That really raises an interesting question, though, is like, who is behind this press campaign? There's obviously a PR campaign that's pushing this fact that, oh my God, Amazon will give up Ring camera footage. Which of Amazon's competitors is?
Yeah, good question. Maybe it's Apple or Google. I don't know.
I was wondering if it was Microsoft, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
Microsoft has really been on a proactive PR approach the last 2 weeks, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know though. At the end of the day, if we look at this a little bit differently, like, hey, Amazon proactively works with law enforcement to try to prevent crime in your area. So let's talk about it that way. That sounds a whole lot better than the way this is being spun. And I think a lot of people would look at it
this way on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of people would look at it that way, though. They would say, hey, they're not just giving it to the police, but this is like so the police can help prevent crime in my area. I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think about it in that way.
See, I mean, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
You actually have a very good point. I mean, it could be just a government-funded smear campaign. But, like, I do take issue. Like, I don't agree with you, Ian, on the fact that, oh, well, they're just trying to fight crime. That makes it okay. Like, I'm still, like, you know me, I'm a firm believer. I feel like my constitutional rights, even though clearly Amazon's a private company, they're not violating my constitutional rights. But I feel like my constitutional rights are more important than the ability to solve a crime.
Well, your constitutional rights, again, though, they're not at play at all. This is a simple request and a response to something that you've agreed to ahead of time. And further, they could choose to not respond also. So what would be interesting to know is at what percentage of requests do they approve and do they not approve? You know, I don't know the answer to that.
Well, so
my guess is probably they approve at all of them, is my guess. But
I mean, look at companies like Reddit or even Google most of the time. If they get a request from law enforcement, they tell you, and then you have the opportunity to hire legal counsel and file a motion to quash that request. I mean, I feel like Amazon should do the same thing, like give you that opportunity.
It's interesting. Do you remember a few years ago when there was a big deal around the warrant canary, where places like Reddit, for example, would have that page? It's like, hey, we have not received any requests and fulfilled any requests from federal, state, or local law enforcement to provide information. And now those things have just kind of gone away. Yeah. Yeah. And if they take that page down, right, then you know, because they can't tell you that they've got the request, but they can tell you that they have not received a request. So,
well, and I remember like when Reddit was a fledgling company, that was a big deal. Like a lot of people were like, hey,
very, very pro user. We got to think back. So let's really, really think back. Go to 2008 and let's talk about like Ron Paul. Was that 2008 or 12? Anyway, yeah, it was 2008, right? He was relevant to 2008. And remember how big Reddit was on Ron Paul?
Yeah.
It's all changed a bunch.
I've always kind of tied in the moment in time where Reddit just turned to absolute shit is really close in time to when Media Matters went on that big campaign, insert moderators into every popular front page sub. And I feel like Reddit has been this echo chamber ever since.
Well, it certainly has been. And that's a problem, is thought diversity is very important. And people do not realize the importance of thought diversity at all. If you do not have thought, or if you bring thought diversity to the table, you're all of a sudden a bigot. And that's a dangerous thing. So a hallmark of a high functioning society is thought diversity, whether or not you agree or disagree.
Like
but
if
they just definitely don't have that in many cases.
Like if you're like me and you like search places like Twitter and Reddit for breaking news and stuff like that, it's virtually impossible to not come across people who now think, and we're talking young people, right? Like probably most of them are like 30 or under, but it's it's not uncommon on these platforms to come across people who truly in their heart believe that freedom of speech is now a bad thing.
Yeah, it is. It's a little bit concerning too. And it's also concerning to hear people that, you know, their view of the world is probably skewed based on only the things they've read. And that's a bit concerning too, but they immediately dismiss any opinion that's not in line with theirs. They won't even have the conversation. So,
well, then the scary thing is they're coming to these conclusions based on things that they read on these very platforms.
Yeah.
That's like, I mean, that's the scary part to me, is like, I honestly wonder how long we have until we have new regulations on what the freedom of speech is allowed to cover and allow, because clearly we're going to a point, you know, we're going there slowly, but we're definitely going to a point where we're creating more and more exceptions to the First Amendment, right?
Well,
Would
do you
agree?
remember 5 or 6 years ago? It was this maybe a little more, but the statement was freedom of speech does not guarantee that you won't have repercussions for what you say. And now you often hear things like freedom of speech is just not relevant on the internet.
Right. And
So
I'm
it's
I'm all
changed.
for repercussions for speech, but when I say that, I mean like someone getting pissed off and punching you in the face. I don't mean you facing jail time. But now it's like in Western nations where, this used to be, and granted, we're the only one that actually has that in our constitution, right? There's no freedom of speech in Canada or the UK or wherever else. But I do find it, you tend to see that things that are quote unquote successful in like the UK and Europe or Canada will eventually be tried in California and New York, and then they become common principles in the US as a whole. It's like a long process, but that's typically the route that things take. It's, yeah, like you said, it's very concerning. I'm very concerned that, like, for example, okay, Reddit officially banned the term groomer or grooming. You can't accuse LGBTQ, you can't accuse them of being groomer. Like, even if the story has to do with drag queen story hour and this drag queen's dancing in front of a 7-year-old child that's giving them dollar bills, you're still not allowed to call them a groomer. No matter what, it's considered now a anti-LGBTQ slur on Reddit. And I think that that's common. I think that on Twitter, you probably have a similar rule, or you will soon. On Facebook, same thing. So when big tech coordinates, and this brings up a greater issue, is when they coordinate together, is big tech stronger than our government at this point?
Yes. And
Probably so in some ways that they have a lot. They got a lot more reach, I think, and a lot more instantaneous reach.
So then do our laws and rights even matter if big tech has more encompassing and more restrictive rules that they all agree on?
I mean, if they do business here, yes, they do matter. Yeah.
Well, no. But the thing is, like, because like the Bill of Rights applies to government action. So if big tech is stronger than our government, then it doesn't have to be the government that's censoring you.
Oh, I see
And
what
then
you're saying.
and then you have to
Regarding
wonder,
freedom of speech. Sure. Yeah. I mean,
well,
I don't know. That's a good
wait,
question.
for example, let's say that you're a political movement, a political party, or whatever in the US that wishes that you could eliminate the First Amendment, but you can't. It's never going to pass. Couldn't you then just make a deal with big tech in some manner? Maybe you agree to drop an antitrust lawsuit or something like that, as long as they take a certain stance against certain speech. So basically what I'm saying is, like, even though it's allowed because of our First Amendment, that doesn't mean that these private companies need to allow it, even if they're operating in concert with each other. I mean, they can coordinate to ban speech that they don't like, and it's still it's not a violation of our First Amendment rights. And I think that that's one of the biggest, things that our Constitution overlooked, and that we could have not. It would be impossible to foresee this back then, but we never imagined this separate governance. That, okay, well, we're not the government, but we control the vast majority of technology and communication in this country, and we're not going to allow these particular things. That's almost worse than the government restricting them, in my opinion.
you're absolutely correct. But like from me being like a capitalist absolutist, okay, maximalist or something like that, the private platform can do whatever they want on their platform. The problem is competition here, right? So
Totally
and
agree.
yeah, but the problem is competition, because if there was a completely good alternative, and I recently had this topic because really a lot of libertarian and anarcho-capitalist chats and all the stuff, right? And these topics are, we really talk about this a lot in this chat, and that's something which I really like about it, right? But point is, if Reddit starts to, or Twitter or something like that, they start to censorship, and they have full right to do it because they can impose whatever rules they can, right, on their own platform. Why people don't have an alternative instead?
Well, okay, wait.
That means
So wait, we do have alternatives. They just don't have market share. That's the problem. And here's the issue, right? I fully agree. And legally, you're absolutely correct. A private platform can instill whatever regulations and rules they want, and it's perfectly legal. The problem that I have is when these competing platforms, like clearly, like Facebook, Twitter, and Google, and these companies, like they're competitors. Okay, they're competing for some of the same market share as each other. The problem that I have is when they collude to censor. Like, and you see it all the time. Once something becomes disallowed on one platform, it becomes disallowed on all the others at the same time. And that's my problem. Like, excuse me, Beth.
The problem is, Degen, the problem is that these companies are thinking that censorship gives them competitional advantage.
It very well may, because maybe they're getting some sort of green lights from the government or endorsement from the government, or they're allowed to do certain things. But there is an antitrust angle here. When big tech companies collude to restrict your speech, it might not be a First Amendment violation because they're not the government, but at some point it could become an antitrust issue.
Exactly. So at this point, there should be some kind of mechanic for the people to say, we disagree with more censorship. Because, you guys, what you're telling about freedom of speech and all this stuff, it's super familiar to me, considering my background and all this stuff. I have to impose self-censorship in Russia, even if in our constitution, freedom of speech is basically our constitutional right. Everyone knows in Russia that constitution is not a law. It's basically a suggestion, It works.
That's kind of,
yeah.
I mean, that's kind of how it is here too. Like the Second Amendment, for example, is fairly absolute in its wording. But like politicians are trying to pass red flag laws where it's like, I could call the cops and say, hey, Ian is kind of troubling. Like he's worrying me. I think he might have some kind of mental illness. And Ian could
hold up. Degen, before you go further, I have to make a disclaimer that this is just a thought experiment and it's not how it is actually. So, FBI, hold up your horses, okay?
No. But I'm saying, like here in the U.S., like we have the right to go purchase firearms and shoot firearms in certain environments and things like that. So, but it's like red flag laws are designed to give people the ability to make a report on you, like, hey, this guy's been saying things that I think are troubling. He probably shouldn't be allowed to buy a gun for the next year or 5 years, 10 years, or however long. That's kind of, at what point does quote unquote troubling speech? I mean, that could be something like speech supporting political party that I disagree with. You know what I mean? So,
Degen,
it's too easily weaponized.
Can you please remind me what does the Fifth Amendment says?
What did you say? The Sixth Amendment?
Fifth, number 5.
Fifth Amendment.
Yes, sir.
Oh, that's against self-incrimination.
Oh, yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah, you're right. I plead the fifth.
All right. So, thing is, red flag law takes away your Fifth Amendment.
I mean, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it does, because,
and even more, I believe in Constitution of the United States, there is also a part when the government cannot take anything or even enter your property without warrant, and warrant cannot be issued without sufficient proof.
Well, okay, so that's a little bit of that's a nuanced situation. So they can enter your property without a warrant if there's exigent circumstance. Like that's the
okay. All right.
That's the rule. So,
all right.
Like, for example, like if they're chasing a guy with a gun who just robbed a bank,
and
he runs inside your house, they can enter your house. So
Yeah, but that's
And there's lots of nuance there too. There's lots of other things that can't happen. If they chase a guy who shot somebody and he somehow randomly ran into your house, totally unrelated, you don't know him, and there's drugs sitting on a table.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Echo.
Well, and the other thing that I think a lot of people don't really fully understand is that even if your constitutional rights were violated in that search or that entry, your recourse is just to have the evidence tossed out. It can't be used against you. You can't just like sue the cops for it. I mean, in some circumstances you can. We have civil rights violation lawsuits, 1983 lawsuits and whatnot, but it's you can't just, you're not going to get a big payday because a cop came in your house without a warrant.
Qualified immunity is a big deal, and it's important for police from that perspective. I'm a fan of it. I think it's an important thing, and without it,
see, I'm a fan of it to an extent. I'm just it's just until when it gets taken advantage of, that's when I have issues with it. And there are agencies in this country that do take advantage of it, and that's when I start to have a problem with it.
The fact of the matter is, if there were one easy trick to never get charged or to get off with any crime, everybody would be doing it.
You said like if it's easy or something like that, you just have to carry the get out of jail Monopoly card with you. It always helps,
Yeah, duh. I mean, come on, carry your card.
Yeah.
Man. I would like to introduce a motion to award the greatest trader on earth award. Like we have scoured the earth for the best profit taking trading that has ever been seen in the history of financial markets. And we have found some of the most prolific trading, just absolute profit making. The kind of profit making that can turn someone from a low paid public servant into one of the wealthiest families in the history of the United States. And on that note, we would like to award this prolific trader award to Nancy Pelosi and her husband, because by some interesting, just completely coincidental and skilled trading methods, they have managed to make some of the most profitable trades that we have ever seen in the history of U.S. financial markets. That has to be just, education and learned skill, right? Couldn't possibly be anything insider, could it?
What does he do for a living?
I mean, I think he gets.
I mean, he has to have an official job, right?
And he trades. I'm pretty sure it's like those two things. But
my
I do. I do wonder what he does for a living, and what I mean, for all I know, he's a hedge fund manager. I don't know.
I think he's something like that. Like he's a Silicon Valley investor, and whatever else. But
yeah. I mean, it does make you wonder, though, like with your spouse being in such of a position of power, with that much influence and insight, should they even be doing those things? I think that's obviously the question here.
But Ian, if you worked for Goldman Sachs and your wife was making these trades, that would raise big eyebrows. Maybe even
that would be problematic for sure.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that this is like not a very big deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, their net worth is around $135 million, according to Google, off of a $210,000 a year salary.
Yeah,
$210,000,
exactly.
Which is probably not. I don't know what. I mean, that's not crazy. That's a upper middle class, probably.
Not even where she lives. I mean, they're in San Francisco, so that's not very much money for San Francisco. So, they're actually probably considered upper middle class where they live. Like they're not wealthy or rich on that salary, but they're wealthy and rich based on their trades. So to me, that seems completely inappropriate, but it's not illegal.
So the big deal recently is they bought like $8 million worth of Nvidia stock as they're working on passing this chip industry subsidy
Yeah, where they subsidize and give incentive to chip builders to chip developers to build in the U.S.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's that definitely raises some questions, and I just have to wonder what the reasonable explanation is. I really can't come up with one. Now, the only thing I can think of is, I mean, it's not her husband did it, right? They don't buy this through a trust, or maybe they buy it through a trust, but it's not a blind trust.
Yeah.
And if it's not, I don't know what the reasonable explanation is. It doesn't.
But again, if you worked at Goldman Sachs and your wife was doing this, you might get fired.
Yeah, no question. I mean, there's no question that it does not pass the sniff test for sure.
So I think the real question for me, though, okay, everybody hates Nancy Pelosi. She's super annoying. She's like impossible to like. It's very difficult, no matter what your political views, it's very difficult to watch her speak and listen to the things that she says and actually.
How does she? Oh, is that true? I mean, if she is speaker,
I mean, maybe I don't know. That's just the way I feel, I guess. And it seems to be like a pretty popular opinion. So
she's certainly hard to relate to. The video where she was getting ice cream out of her like
exactly.
$15,000 refrigerator that was like $9 a quart ice cream or whatever.
But so
that's kind of hard to relate to for the common person.
Right. And so I guess what it really boils down to is at what point do we do something about this? And like, even though she's the one being presented as the face of this congressional insider trading, she's not the first and she won't be the last. So
no, you look at the average net worth of members of of Congress, it's crazy.
Right. So on what level is this really happening?
I actually would go a little bit different way for a second, First of all, I have like one important question. What we see right now happening with Nvidia signing the deal, right? And I know that Nancy Pelosi was biased against Trump, and I was why I'm coming with that idea, right? Remember that all of this started with Trump initiating the America First policy, trying to attract chip makers, high-tech corporation back to America.
Well, and isn't that the thing, though, is that all of these politicians that publicly fought against certain Trump policies are now taking advantage of them, even though they proclaim to hate them?
Exactly. So, I mean, that's double standards, right? And I know politicians are all about the double standards, to be honest, right? But Nancy Pelosi, first of all, I agree with you. We have no idea how much of the government people are doing insider trading. I believe a lot of them, to be honest, because their salaries are so small, they need to make extra buck, First of all, is it corruption? Like, can we say that this is corruption at this point?
It's absolutely corruption, but the part you really need to ask yourself is there any politician, like even the ones like everybody takes sides, right? It's like, oh, look at the Democrats, they're insider trading, as if Republicans aren't too, right?
Yeah. So the question is it illegal corruption?
Well, it's not illegal, but at what point do you reach the conclusion that you can't trust any of these motherfuckers?
Exactly. I believe there was actually a law which was stopped, not a law, but like proposition to restrict any kind of government workers from trading, and then it was dragged and stopped, right? I mean,
someone just recently introduced another bill to stop Congress from trading things that are affected by the things that they're about to vote on. And of course, it just got rejected quick. And
obviously, because it's like bees against honey.
So I've been told, and I'm not a politician, like this is not my wheelhouse, but I've been told by multiple people that if you eliminate that there's 100 times less motivation to actually get into civil service, that people won't do it. People won't run for office. People won't,
Well, it's a hell of a lot of work for $210,000 a year. I'd say that I wouldn't do it.
Exactly. So they're looking at it like, that's part of the spoils of
like
war.
A fringe benefit.
Yeah, for being a politician. So, but at the same time, I don't like that. I actually want to vote for the people that are cool with just making $210,000 a year. You know what I mean?
So half the members of Congress are, or the median net worth of Congress is $1 million. About half of them are millionaires or more.
I'm sure.
But if we talk about that, a net worth of $1 million plus, with real estate, so we've talked
It's
a lot
not
about
very much
lately.
money.
Yeah, it's not that much. It's
But I mean,
depending on your age, right? If you're like what's his name, Bernie Sanders, right? I think he's like 930 years old. And he's got a net worth of 4 million. I mean, I have zero problem with that at all.
I mean, I'm more
but Nancy Pelosi with 135 or whatever, that does seem a little high to me.
I would like to see more blue collar
actually
people in Congress. And
What's that guy from Pennsylvania? I mean, that dude looks super blue collar.
I think that dude is just a complete plant because he runs on the same platform every time, and like it's absolute bullshit, in my opinion. But
Well,
okay, but
we had a friend, Ian and I, that I'm pretty sure worked for that dude and had a lot of good things to say about him, but he just puts off, like, I just don't trust politicians that like sell us on their blue collarness.
he
'Cause it's
could be
usually
a welder. Like he looks like he could just like, go do politics and then go home and like weld up a
so my
race car or something.
like one of my state
blue collar.
One of my state senators is Patty Murray, and she ran on that kind of platform. Like she was like considered like the soccer mom in tennis shoes, right? Like that's kind of like when she first ran for office, that was her whole platform. And it's like now she's been in there for fucking like 20 or 30 years. I mean, I feel like she ran when I was in high school or something. And she's just been there forever now. And she's a total career politician at this point and absolutely wealthy. And that's the kind of thing that I feel should not be encouraged or should not be allowed by some sort of, cap on how long you can be in office for or something.
But talking about government, and I talked about Trump. Have you heard of Ivana Trump died recently?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird too. Like apparently she fell down the stairs.
Right, in the same week when almost the same week, same months, I would say, when another high-ranking official, Shinzo Abe, was murdered. Like too many deaths of high-ranking people,
The thing is, what would anybody have to gain by killing Ivana Trump?
Maybe it's some kind of message, but you know what? I believe we're on a time, and that's what we're gonna leave for the next episode of DegenCast.
Wait. If you're gonna do a cliffhanger, the cliffhanger should be who stands to gain by the death of Ivana Trump?